Here's the part most families never hear. You don't just need a trust for the irresponsible child. You need a trust for the responsible one because they're the high-yield target. They have a career, they have a spouse, they own a home, they have a real liability. And here's the problem. Unlike the spendthrift kid, the good kid should be the one managing his own inheritance. You fix the spendthrift kid's inheritance by taking away their control, but that won't work with the good kid. The old-fashioned way was to leave the good kid their inheritance outright, but today that can put a target on their back for creditors, opportunists, or one stretch of bad luck. And here's why this matters. Right now, the world your kids live in is different than the world most estate plans were designed for. More lawsuits, more complex finances, more blended families, a higher divorce rate, more financial pressure. The old default doesn't automatically make sense anymore. Today I'm going to show you a modern solution, a beneficiary-controlled descendants trust, a trust built for the good kid. And here's the part families tell me privately all the time. I trust my child completely. I just don't trust the world they're living in. What if I told you you can give the good kid protection and control? That's the mindset shift this whole episode is going to give you. How to protect the good kid from the world, not from themselves. Quick pause here. Here's the simple version. This isn't about limiting your child. It's about limiting what can happen to your child's inheritance. Before we get technical, let's talk about what parents actually feel. Because the hardest part of this planning is not the paperwork. It's the emotion. A lot of parents feel guilty even thinking about this. They think, if I put a trust around my good kid's inheritance, am I sending a message that I don't trust them? Will this cause a rift with my son or daughter-in-law? No, you're sending the opposite message. What you're saying is, I trust you, I believe you'll do the right thing, and because I trust you, I want your inheritance protected from things that you cannot control. And to that son or daughter-in-law, you're saying, if your husband or wife dies unexpectedly, there will be resources for your children, our grandchildren. Some parents worry it will create tension with in-laws, or they worry it will look like they're trying to control from their child's marriage from the grave. But the truth is, designing protection is not mistrust. It's foresight. It's like buying life insurance when you're healthy. It's like wearing a seatbelt when you're a good driver. It's not because you expect a crash. It's because you understand that crashes happen. And parents also worry about fairness. How do I do this without making one child feel judged and the other child feel favored? Every child is different. Let me repeat that. If you have multiple children, they're all different. And fairness is not about being the same. If you're the same, you treat every child the same, you're ignoring their uniqueness. You're actually treating them with disrespect. So every child is different. So often the terms of their gift are also different. If the plan comes from you, in their heart, they're going to understand why you built their trust for them differently than their brother or sister. In the long run, what's best is what you think is best. Fairness is not about what the child thinks is fair, but what the parent knows to be the right thing to do. If this sounds emotional, that's because it is. And if you felt any of this, you're not alone. Almost every parent does. And don't worry, nobody needs a law degree to understand this, not even close. By the end of this episode, you'll know what a third-party irrevocable trust is in plain English. You'll know what a beneficiary-controlled trust is and what it is not. You'll know the 3 real-world risks that hit responsible adult children. And you'll know the control levers that let your child manage the inheritance while keeping protection available. Trust rules vary by state. This is education, not legal advice. The goal is to help you ask better questions and make better design choices in your own estate plan. And I promise this will all make sense, even if you've never looked at a trust in your life. When I explain this to families, they usually nod and say, "Oh, this finally makes sense." And just so we're clear, this is for families who want their responsible adult child in control, but don't want the inheritance exposed as an easy target. This is not the same design used for addiction issues or special needs planning. Those use different tools. Today is about protecting what we call the good kid, okay? And maybe that sounds a little harsh on the other kids, but you know what I mean. Remember what I said. Every child is different. They don't have to have the same powers over their inheritance. Okay, now that you understand the why, let's talk about the how. Third-party irrevocable trusts. Boy, that's a mouthful. Here's the simple version of what a third-party irrevocable trust really is. You create a plan while you're alive, then you die, and your child's inheritance does not show up as a pile of money in their name. It doesn't show up as a big deposit in their checking account. Instead, it lands inside a trust created by you, not by them. That matters because a trust created by parents is treated very differently than a trust created by the beneficiary themselves. This is often called a descendants trust. Each child can have their own continuing trust instead of taking everything outright. Think of it like a safe deposit box. Your child has the key, but the box itself is built out of steel. Returning to legal language, you own something valuable and give it to a trust for the benefit of your child. That's a third-party trust. Why? Because the valuable thing never belonged to the good kid. It belonged to you, and when you die, it belongs to the trust. If it belonged to the child outright, it would be exposed to their sources of loss. The old-fashioned way was to give the valuable thing to the good kid outright. This is the classic language, right, in a traditional will. To my son Jim and my daughter Joan in equal shares. That seems right because they're responsible people. But if you do it that way, you cannot have third-party trust protections because the valuable thing belongs to the child. With a beneficiary-controlled trust, the good kid doesn't get the asset. They get all the benefits without exposing the asset to creditors, divorcing spouses, opportunists, or bad luck. Let me make this clearer. The trust is like a hard-shell backpack your child carries. They carry the benefit, but outsiders can't easily rip it open. You're not making things complicated for your child. You're simplifying their life by giving them structure that protects them automatically. In real life, the inheritance sits in a trust account instead of a personal account. Your child still invests, still pays for things that improve their life. The difference is that major decisions follow rules that keep everything legally separate and defensible. Most of the time, day-to-day life feels normal. The structure just works quietly in the background. Before we go deeper, let's slow down because I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking, okay, is this the complicated part? It's actually really simple. For the good kid trust, most of the time, life feels normal. A normal month might look like this. Your child invests through a brokerage account titled to the trust. So on the name of that brokerage statement, it doesn't say, John Smith. It says the John Smith Descendants Trust or something like that. They pay certain expenses through the trust account. They can work with their usual advisor. They can handle emergencies. This isn't barbed wire, it's bubble wrap. The trust is not there to make your child feel supervised. It's there to make the inheritance harder to attack and harder to pressure. If this still sounds complicated, stay with me. It's about to click. A beneficiary-controlled trust means your child can have meaningful control, managing investments, choosing advisors, having a say in trustee selection, without turning the inheritance into their personal assets. Beneficiary-controlled does not mean unlimited withdrawals. It means control with guardrails. Think of it like giving your child the steering wheel, but you're choosing the car, the brakes, the seat belt, the airbag. They're still driving. You're just making sure the road doesn't ruin the journey. And here are the biggest myths, okay? I'm going to give you the biggest myths. Myth number 1, trusts are only for spendthrifts. That is, only for people who cannot manage money. The truth is, modern trusts are often for responsible adults to protect them from outside risk. Myth number 2, if my child has control, there's no protection. Here's the truth. Protection depends on how control is structured. Myth number 3, these trusts are only for wealthy families. Here's the truth. If anything, a modest inheritance may need protection more. Why? Because one accident or lawsuit can wipe it out. High net worth folks need this also, but so do folks with smaller estates. Here's a quick micro story. A parent once said, "It's only $120,000. It's not like we're wealthy." And I told them, that's exactly why protection matters. Because when the inheritance is modest, it doesn't take a $5 million lawsuit to change the family's life. It takes one car accident with an underinsured driver, one business dispute, one divorce that turns amicable into expensive. I'll give you a personal example. I inherited a little bit of money from my grandfather. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was exactly what I needed to start my law firm. So a little gift can go a long way. So, the lesson is a small inheritance can be a life changer, but it's also a lost target. Let me give you a quick story that brings this to life, okay? A family did everything right. They had a good kid with a good job and a good marriage. They inherited a vacation property. It was supposed to be the family gathering place, but the inheritance came to that kid outright, not in trust. So they retitled it, right? They merged it. They paid expenses out of joint accounts. 10 years later, divorce happened, and the vacation home became a bargaining chip. Not because anyone planned badly, because they planned casually. Now the 3 big risks. Let me tell you the 3 big risks to the good kid, right? Let's talk about the 3 risks that hit the good kids the hardest. Risk number 1 is divorce and commingling. Divorce doesn't automatically take inheritances away, but commingling does damage almost anywhere, right, that there's a divorce. So what is commingling? Well, you get your inheritance and you spend it on the house that you own with your spouse, or you pay mortgages together, or the money becomes part of your day-to-day expenses in your marriage. If inheritance money gets mixed into joint accounts, used to pay down jointly titled assets, or becomes part of the marital financial rhythm, problems show up fast. A trust keeps title clean without forcing your child to be rude or secretive. "Honey, I'd gladly add you to the account, but I can't. My parents left it to me in a trust." This preserves generosity without exposing the inheritance. 4 simple habits keep inheritances safe. Don't commingle. Don't retitle trust assets personally. Keep records clean. And when possible, let the trust own things that the child uses. If you remember only one thing from this section, it's this. Commingling is what turns protected into exposed. Risk number 2 is the spendy spouse, right? We have the spouse who might be a nice person, but we have financial misalignment. Your child might be responsible, their spouse might be wonderful, but financially they're mismatched. A trust reduces pressure, the pressure to share, to rescue extended family members, or to upgrade lifestyle permanently. The trust becomes the no, not your child. It protects both the relationship and the inheritance. When I explain this to parents, they usually laugh a little and say, "Oh, so the trust can be the bad guy." Exactly. Risk number 3 is liability careers and real-world lawsuits. The good kid usually has a liability-heavy job. Physicians, landlords, business owners, contractors, professionals who sign guarantees. They don't need supervision. They need a shield. Insurance helps, but it doesn't eliminate risk. If they don't own the valuable thing, you can give them a shield they cannot build themselves. That's the third-party descendants trust. For liability professions, this trust is like adding another insurance policy, except there's no premiums, no adjusters, no claims. It also prevents sibling resentment. Nobody becomes the gatekeeper. The responsible child stays in control of their own share without turning the family into a committee. Okay, that's the risk. Now let's look at what this changes in real life. Let me give you a contrast that parents understand instantly. Marriage path A. Your child stays married forever. Great. Marriage path B. They divorce, then remarry later. Maybe there's some stepkids in this new blended family. Even in happy families, this happens. Outright inheritance tends to drift into the marital ecosystem. A trust can help keep your family's inheritance in your child's line of descent and keep it there despite divorce, despite remarriage, and despite a blended family complexity, while still giving your child a real life. That means that the inheritance follows your line of descent, your children, your grandchildren, and not stepkids or second marriage spouses. This isn't about punishing a spouse. It's about preventing accidental drift. Let me give you a quick story that brings that control part to life. I've seen families who did a simple will. Everything went outright to the children at death, right? They get it outright. And then, and they had a good kid, but the good kid became the family accountant, the banker, the emergency fund, the pressure point, and it created tension where none needed to exist. Now let's talk about how we avoid that. Now let's talk about what I call the control levers in this descendants trust. Most people think you must choose between control and protection. In reality, you can design layers. Your good kids trust will have two different modes, normal life mode and trouble on the horizon mode. Here's the takeaway. You're building a system that works in calm weather and in storms. Lever one is the power to remove and replace a trustee. You can let your descendant, your kid, have that power. One of the safest forms of control is not taking the money, it's choosing who manages the structure. Your child isn't stuck with someone who communicates poorly or charges too much. It's fair and flexible. A trustee is basically the adult in the room, the person who makes sure the plan works the way you intended. They decide what gets distributed, when it gets distributed, how it's documented, and how the trust stays separate and defensible. If you pick the wrong trustee, the trust may still exist, but the family can suffer. So here's a classic situation. Parents name the responsible sibling as trustee, thinking it's efficient and fair. But now the responsible sibling has to say yes or no to distributions. And over time, it stops being mom and dad's plan and becomes my sister controlling my money. That resentment can last decades. A beneficiary-controlled trust for the good kid is designed to avoid that. It keeps control with the beneficiary without turning a sibling into a lifetime manager. Lever 2 is child as trustee, with limits, of course, right? So the child can actually be a trustee or co-trustee. Control is not ownership unless you draft it that way. So yes, in most instances, you can permit the good kid to act as his or her own trustee, or maybe co-trustee. A beneficiary can often serve as trustee safely if distribution powers are properly limited by standards like health, education, maintenance, and support. And we also have another beneficiary. In other words, after that kid passes away, the default beneficiary is going to be his children or her children. In real life, this feels like normal financial management, but the trust keeps the legal wall in place. And remember what I said, trouble on the horizon mode. If the beneficiary trustee, in other words, the kid is also the trustee, if they see a problem coming, they can resign and appoint an independent trustee. That shuts the door to that potential liability. Now, what about lever 3? Lever 3 is splitting investment and distribution roles. Splitting investment and distribution roles. Often the beneficiary controls investments while an independent person controls discretionary distribution when risks appear. This is one of the most common grown-up tools in modern estate planning. It respects competence while acknowledging that life gets messy. Lever 4 is the limited power of appointment. Your child can choose where the remainder goes. That is, they get to decide if there's something left, where does it go? Does it go to their children, family, or charity? You get to decide if that's more limited. Some people would prefer it stays in their family line and they don't give the child much discretion about changing beneficiaries. Some give them a lot of discretion. This gives dignity and flexibility without giving control that looks like ownership. Lever 5 is closing the door when life gets messy. If there's a lawsuit, divorce, creditor pressure, or burnout, your child can resign as trustee and install an independent trustee. I mentioned that before. This is the difference between theoretical protection and real life protection. And remember, don't own things unnecessarily. For example, if your child wants a house, let the trust buy the house when appropriate. They still get the benefit. They just don't take on the vulnerability. Here's another contrast that parents understand. Business path A. The trust owns the business interest directly. That can work in the right design, but it can also put trust assets closer to the blast radius of a business risk. What does that mean? Well, if the trust owns a bunch of money and also owns a business and the business goes bust, the business creditors might be able to grab the money. So business path B is safer. The trust acts more like a bank. Here's another tool families miss. Sometimes the risk isn't the inheritance, it's what the inheritance gets invested into. Risky assets like rental properties or businesses carry liability. One solution is to position the trust as a lender instead of an owner. The trust acts like a bank. It lends money secured by notes or mortgages. It can be the primary creditor of a business or this risky asset. It can finance a home, the purchase of a home, while keeping the trust's wealth in a safe posture. This keeps the inheritance in the vault and avoids putting trust wealth in the riskiest buckets. It's not hiding money, it's just smart financial architecture. And as for management, the good kid usually is the manager of the business, right? Maybe they even own the business, even though it's subject to the debt of the trust. Now you have protection and control. Here's the takeaway. Keep the inheritance in the vault and finance the project from the outside when appropriate. Now a fair question. If this is so good, why haven't I heard this before? Parents always stop me right here and say something like, wait, why didn't anyone tell us this before? You're not alone. Almost every parent I talk to has the same reaction. Here's the honest answer, and it's not about blaming your lawyer. The legal world is a little like medicine. For decades, the standard approach was based on what the world looked like back then. Back then, the default estate plan was avoid probate, maybe, or maybe have a will, but keep it simple. Leave it outright to responsible adults. Use trusts mostly for taxes or maybe for a disabled child or a spendthrift. Give installment payments to kids. I've read this 1,000 times if I've read it once in a will. I give somebody makes a will, they have a kid. The kid gets a third of the estate at age 25, a third at age 30, and a third at 35. Well, if somebody's waiting to get their money, right, the kid gets it at 30 and their creditor's like, oh, great, I'll take that from you, right? It's better to keep it in the trust. So back then, families were simpler, right? People went to church. Liability was different. The divorce rate was minuscule. The financial world was different. But the world changed faster than the default documents did. Modern beneficiary-controlled descendants trusts are a response to the world your kids actually live in now. So if you've never heard this, it's not because you weren't smart. It's because the default playbook is still catching up with reality. Another common parent question: what if my child moves? Here's the reassuring part. Trusts travel well. Your child can live in a different state. The bank accounts and investments are still stable, and the trust can be administered with flexibility, especially if it has mechanisms like trustee replacement and a trust protector. The exact rules vary by state. Yes, that's true. But the overall idea, keeping inheritances separate and structured, does not disappear just because someone crosses a border. And for those parents with the option, if your good kid lives in a high income tax state, it may be possible to set up your trust so that it's taxed from in the low income tax state where that trust was established. If you're thinking, okay, good, because my kids move every 5 minutes, you're in good company. Now let's talk about the mistakes that break protection. If your child can force unlimited distributions, someone else will argue that they can step into their shoes, a creditor or a divorcing spouse, right? If the kid can take the money without any kind of restraints, then the trust isn't going to really protect them. The trust cannot say, take whatever you want, whenever you want. That is the same as owning it outright. Common mistakes include unlimited withdrawals, a beneficiary who is the only trustee with broad powers, and no mechanism to tighten protection when risks appear. Modern design avoids these. And here's the emotional truth. Most of these mistakes come from love. Parents want to show trust. They want to avoid feeling controlling. But courts don't read intentions. They read powers, titles, and patterns. Here's the takeaway. Love is not the problem. Drafting is. A trust protector. What's a trust protector? I mentioned that before. Well, a trust protector answers the question, what if life changes? They're a watchdog and a mechanic. A trust protector is one of your trouble on the horizon mode switch, right? In normal life, your child has more control. If trouble appears, marriage cracks, lawsuits, incapacity, the protector can tighten the system. They can remove trustees, require independence for certain decisions, update provisions after legal changes, and help your child step out of harm's way. 99% of the time, they do nothing. But in that 1% moment, they can save the entire inheritance. Okay, so a quick recap so far. You want protection without taking away control. That's what a beneficiary-controlled trust does. It keeps inheritances separate. It reduces exposure to divorce, lawsuits, and pressure. And it gives your good kid real autonomy without turning the inheritance into an easy target. Okay, back to the big family question, fairness. Let's talk about sibling fairness directly because this keeps parents up at night. Some parents worry that a trust for one child feels like judgment, but continuing trusts can actually be the fairest structure. Each child gets their own share, right? Right there, you've eliminated a lot of problems. Each child gets their own trust. Each child has their own control structure appropriate for their life. Fairness doesn't mean identical mechanics. That would be disrespecting the uniqueness of your different children. Fairness means equal love, equal respect, and a structure that fits each child's real-world risks and unique needs. And it avoids the classic mistake. You don't want to name the responsible child as the lifetime manager of everyone else. That may feel efficient, but it's emotionally expensive. I go into that in greater detail in my podcast where I talk about how to choose your adult trustee, the trustee of your adult child's trust. Okay, so this planning keeps relationships intact. Now let me tell you a story. Two futures for the same family. Future A. You leave a responsible child $500,000 outright. They save it, invest it, do everything right. Then life happens. A lawsuit, a divorce, a business crash. Suddenly that inheritance sits in their name, visible, exposed, discoverable. It becomes leverage for someone else. Not because your child did anything wrong, but because you unintentionally handed them a target instead of a shelter. Future B, same child, Same $500,000, but now inside a beneficiary-controlled trust. Life gets messy again, but this time, separation stays clean. Pressure is lower, leverage is higher, and the trust shifts into protective mode automatically. No spotlight, no target. The inheritance remains a resource, not an opportunity for someone else. Okay, so families tell me this is the light bulb moment. Same child, same gift. Two completely different outcomes. And the only difference is the structure, that beneficiary-controlled trust instead of an outright gift. Here's the takeaway, right? The same kid, same gift, different result. The asset is not lost due to life circumstances, and structure is the difference. Okay, so let's recap. The good kid is the target. Outright inheritance is the old way of doing it, the old default. A beneficiary-controlled descendants trust is the modern upgrade. Control is normal in life, right? So the default, I guess, with the beneficiary-controlled trust is they have control enough to make it so that they can do what they want with their inheritance. And then protection gets stronger when risk shows up. If you already have a will or trust, you should ask this question. Do my children receive their inheritance outright or in a continuing trust? And if it's outright, ask whether you can let your responsible child manage the money without exposing it to the risks we all face. Families do this because they love their kids, not because they doubt them. Okay, here's the plain English summary you can repeat at the dinner table. A beneficiary-controlled trust lets your responsible child manage their inheritance without exposing it to divorce, lawsuits, creditors, or pressure from others. Your child still controls the investments, still uses the money, and still lives normally. But the inheritance sits in a safe container you designed. It's not about limiting your child. It's about limiting the world around them. Outright inheritance is the old default. This is the modern one. And here's the vision I want you to leave with. Imagine your child living confidently, not fearfully. Imagine holidays where money is not a tension point. Imagine your inheritance serving as support, not a source of pressure. Because the goal of estate planning is not documents. The goal is peace of mind. You're not trying to control your child from the grave. You're trying to protect your child in the world they actually live in. Remember, trust protections are not just for an irresponsible child. Trust protections are there for the responsible one too. And if you made it this far, congratulations. You now understand something most families never get taught. I'm Jesse Bifulco, host of LifeCast, the LifeCounsel podcast. Please like and subscribe to my free-to-the-listener content. If you know someone who's planning their estate and has a good kid, share this with them. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.